Well, good afternoon and thank you very much, Gordon. I feel like you create very big expectations for me before I stand up here before an audience like this. The expectation, well, fine, he did that in trade, what can he do in defence industry? So I'm very grateful that you can reflect positively on the work that we were able to do in that portfolio. And I've got to say, equally importantly, along with the TPP, I think one of the aspects that I'm most pleased about, which perhaps is even more germane to this part of the world than what we did with the TPP, was the fact we're able to effectively conclude the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or what will be an Indonesia-Australia FTA. Real potential from that. We've got to ink the deal, which hopefully isn't too far away, but given its proximate nature and also given the strength of ties and investment between Indonesia and WA, some real potential. But I'll get into that in a little more detail in a moment, because what I wanted to do this afternoon was take this opportunity to speak to you about defence industry policy in terms of the federal government. Many of you would be very aware already, of course, of the major headlines that the Liberal and National governments put in place since we came to office. But I'd ask and beg for your forgiveness for just a couple of minutes to take the time to repeat them in case there's some of you that are wondering, well, what exactly is happening? I'd like to hear it from the horse's mouth. We are investing, as many of you know, $195 billion into building up Australia's capability with respect to defence and defence industry. We are absolutely committed to making sure that we achieve 2% of GDP as an investment into defence. And the reason why we want to make sure that we do that is to ensure that we can provide defence the certainty that it needs to be able to plan for the strategic challenges that are coming ahead. We unapologetically are determined to ensure that our serving men and women have access to the very best and safest equipment and platforms that they can have. But concurrent with that commitment is the commercial considerations that exist around what we can do for defence industry. And I can share with you all that one of the discussions that I had with the Prime Minister Scott Morrison when he reshuffled the front bench, and he said to me, look, Steve, I'm going to put trade, tourism and investment into the Senate together with foreign affairs, because they're the two big travel portfolios, and given the numbers, we want to make sure that we've got adequate representation downstairs, that is in the House of Reps. But what I'd like you to do is focus on defence industry and to pick up on the work that Christopher Pyne's been doing. And the rationale, as Scott explained to me, was because, and at the risk of sounding like I'm giving myself a pat on the back, but one of the areas where I think I perhaps have a stronger forte than a lot of my colleagues in the Federal Parliament is on the connection between government to business interaction. That was what I was doing in my previous portfolio of trade, tourism and investment. It was about driving the interaction between government policy frameworks and business, and that's what I'm doing now in this defence industry framework. Now, I've made the point on a couple of occasions that I don't step into the role wanting to upend the table and say we're starting again. There's no need for that. In fact, I think we sit in the good position where we have developed very strong momentum in the defence industry space over the past several years. Christopher Pyne, as the former Defence Industry Minister and now as Defence Minister, and I have a long history of working very closely together. We did so again in the previous portfolio when we established his defence export strategy, and on my side in the trade portfolio, the Defence Exports Facility under EFIC, our Export Finance Agency. We met, we spoke about what we could do to provide maximum opportunity and support, in particular for the SME sector, to make sure that you could fulfil the potential that exists now to grow Australia's defence exports. So a dedicated multi-billion-dollar facility to assist with that. Now I've got the privilege of serving as Defence Industry Minister. I want to make sure that we continue to make progress in this space. It goes back to the Defence White Paper. That Defence White Paper is where the 2% target came from. It outlines where we have the $195 billion capability build-up that we've outlined and why we want to provide that certainty to defence. But mindful of the need from industry for you to have as much commercial certainty as we can provide, you should be assured, and hear it directly from me as Defence Industry Minister, that I am determined to make sure we follow through on our commitments with respect to that spend, to that build-up, in the programs that we've put in place. We want to see Australia's SME sector in particular succeed with respect to defence industry. And success really has two limbs. The first is a higher level of Australian industrial involvement in our defence industry acquisition and sustainment here in Australia. The second limb is the work that you can participate in as part of the broader remit that we have laid out through policy for Australia to become one of the top 10 defence exporters in the world. So success for you can be a combination of both of those things or one of those things exclusively. Success for you as a defence industry sector will be determined by your ability and desire to pursue the opportunities that lay before you. I caught the tail end of the panel discussion before, and the discussion around that strategy on defence exports and the challenge that is extended to many of you about the way in which you can respond to that demand to be part of a global supply chain. That global supply chain that Australian businesses can be part of is huge and getting bigger. And we've seen recent discussions and policy announcements by, for example, the United States that sees both Australia and Canada recognised within the US as being part of their defence industrial base, which should be incredibly exciting. Now, quite frankly, there are aspects of our inclusion in the US defence industrial base that we don't have clarity on yet. And stepping into this role, for me as Defence Industry Minister, one of the challenges over the next 6 or 7 months before the election will be to get a greater degree of certainty and clarity from the US government about what that actually means and the way in which we can capitalise on that opportunity. That really is my core facilitative role as Minister on your behalf as defence industry suppliers. But can I say, as part of our domestic build-up, we wanted to ensure that we created the right terrain to enable Australian businesses to succeed. A key part of creating the right terrain was to have that certainty around the investment pipeline, and that is best, of course, reflected through our integrated investment plan. The IIP, Integrated Investment Plan, effectively is your roadmap of sorts about the expenditure that's taking place and when in terms of defence. So that can be a signpost for each of you about opportunities as they present themselves. We're investing through the Defence Innovation Hub in making sure that Australian businesses have the capability that you'll need to meet the demands of Australia, but also the demands that will be placed on you to meet opportunities in terms of those defence exports. So our Defence Industrial Capability Plan exists to say to you, as the SME sector in particular, speak to us about where you're wanting investment, co-investment, to help boost your capability. Now, I always like to take the opportunity to say this is not about propping up otherwise unsustainable businesses. Let me be very clear about that. The purpose of our policy is not to say, if you're struggling, we're going to ensure that there's a pipeline of taxpayer dollars to keep your business alive. But what I am saying to you is, if you see the potential for your business, if you see the application through intellectual property, the acquisition of new equipment or plant, that's going to enable your business to be able to become more capable, to be able to fulfil a higher level of acquisition or sustainment, both domestically or internationally, speak to us about that. Put an application in. That's what the Innovation Hub is there to do, to help drive the work that you can do to boost your capability to meet our domestic and international demands and opportunities that present themselves. The front door into defence is, of course, the CDIC. That exists as effectively the interface between the work that defence is doing and, through it as well, contacts with, for example, the primes, the opportunities that will present themselves in that respect for your businesses to become part of that global supply chain, or indeed to be part of work that's taking place in Australia. Similarly, through the investment pipeline that exists now, you'll see increased scope to be able to participate in a range of work that's happening in terms of bases all around the country. From civils through to high-tech gear, there'll be scope for your businesses to be involved, and you should be looking at that IIP, and you should be looking at ways in which you can see in 3 years or in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time what the opportunities will be. Parallel with this, of course, we're putting a lot of thought into the way in which we'll develop labour force. One of the challenges is to make sure that in your workforce planning that you have that, again, higher level of certainty to be able to make decisions about what you're going to do with your labour force. We're very mindful as government that there are going to be some real challenges. Through submarines, future frigates, OPVs, the work that's happening now with Rheinmetall in Queensland on the Boxers, the Hawkeyes, the Bushmasters, there's so many different examples. There is extraordinary potential for you to be involved, but we also are mindful that there will be real challenges with respect to labour force planning. We're not going to duck shove all of that onto you as the private sector. We want to make sure that we put in place appropriate policy and planning to work with you to make sure that we can train people in terms of new apprentices and others coming through, as well as retrain those who might be transitioning from one sector of the economy now into defence as an alternative sector. And of course, I'm exceptionally mindful of the fact that here in WA in particular, there's a level of expertise around resources and energy. A lot of it, of course, has direct application to defence and defence industry. And again, that's precisely where you'll see DICP, or the Industrial Capability Plan, being able to be used to help you adjust and perhaps transition from work you've been doing or to augment the work that you've been doing in resources and energy across into defence industry. So frankly, this conference happens at a very opportune time. The vision of the Perth USAsia Centre in terms of bringing together this conference, the strategic plan that the Western Australian government's put in place and that was announced by the Premier today dovetails very effectively with the overall vision that the federal government has about the way in which we can grow this sector. We want your businesses to succeed. We hopefully have laid out now enough of a framework in terms of investment, time frames and opportunities in relation to exports for you to feel incredibly optimistic and buoyant about the opportunities that will present themselves. You'll be backstopped by support from government in terms of capability. We've got the Next Generation Technology Fund to provide additional R&D support around the creation of new IP for those of you that might be on the cutting edge that are looking at developing over the next 3 to 5+ years. We'll also back you in terms of exports so that when you're trying to be part of a global supply chain or you're discussing opportunities with primes or looking at fulfilling a contract that may be let by another country, say for example Singapore, that you'll know that you'll have access to facilities like the Defence Export Facility and the support that EFIC will be able to provide. And we've also got people on the ground. You heard from David Johnston, the federal government's defence export advocate, but he sits alongside a whole team of people in terms of defence attachés as well as Austrade who have embedded within them personnel from defence to drive this agenda. So hopefully the message that I'm conveying to all of you is that the Australian government is absolutely committed to growth in this sector. We're committed to providing the right framework, and frankly, we are doing as much as I think we possibly could to put in place the right policy settings to drive your industry. Now, I know some of you will say, well, and in fact I had this question yesterday, what guarantees are there, Steve? That's well and good, that's the next 6 months until the election, what happens after that? I don't know. If I knew how you were all going to vote, I might have a better idea. But what I can say to all of you is that we have, as a Liberal and National government, laid out, I think, very clearly our vision and expectation around defence spending and what that means for defence industry. You know the way in which we've shifted from 1.56% of GDP, one of the lowest levels of defence expenditure in Australia's history, to now take us to 2% of GDP. You see our plan around the $200 billion that we've put down. For a subsequent government, if it's us, you'll know the pathway forward. And I know you heard from Richard Marles, the Shadow Minister, who no doubt would have addressed some of this in his remarks as well. But to all of you, we genuinely are deeply committed to the support of your sector in a way that provides a sustainable growth pathway for each of you. So please, take advantage of the myriad of opportunities that exist. There are so many terrific champions in WA, businesses that are having incredible success, from small and moderate-sized businesses through to the larger businesses like, for example, of course, Austal. Now with the OPVs through Lursen, the work that's being done at Henderson, and I had the opportunity yesterday to see the sustainment contracts that BAE is fulfilling, and I think they said to me 37 subcontractors that work on that job. All of that is a strong testament to the policy settings that this government's put in place, because we want to see success in this sector. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Please, if I or my office can be of assistance, let us know. Speak to CDIC, talk to Defence Exports Office, speak to David Johnson as your exports advocate, and speak to the primes about ways in which your businesses can be part of that global supply chain, because we will realise this vision of Australia becoming a top 10 defence exporter. We'll continue to pursue opportunities in markets from the Middle East through to Asia and across the United States, and I will make sure that over the next 6 or 7 months we continue to provide the policy support that you're looking for. So thank you so much.